So my name is Alice Yang. I'm the provost of Stevenson College, and I teach in the history department. I teach several courses, mainly courses dealing with historical memory. Yes, well, one of the things I do in my introductory course is that I team teach is that we have group projects, and part of what we do is we have that class fulfills a general education requirement. It's very large. It's usually between 200 and 250 people. But what we try to do is to engage students who may not necessarily be history majors. In fact, most of them aren't history majors, by getting them to realize that their different backgrounds and their different major interests are actually an asset in terms of studying history. So, for example, we encourage students with a science background to use that scientific background to examine scientific topics that are historical. So, for example, in the Memories of World War II class, we have students sometimes examine the role of scientists in developing atomic weapons, the role of scientists in criticizing the use of those weapons, and in becoming peace activists or becoming, hawks, so that there's a variety of different kind of views. And it's always very impressive to me how they can employ those different skills in creative ways. So, in the case of the scientists, some of them do experiments, some of them can do, employ laboratory research. In the case of artists, we have students sometimes doing very creative projects. We've had musical performances. We've had students create, children's books, artistic renderings. I think what we find is they're able to see how all of these different kinds of backgrounds and in fact different kinds of sources often manifest historical memories that they may not assume before they take our class, but in the process of taking our class, they're able to realize history is manifested in a variety of ways, includes a variety of viewpoints, and they're able to analyze them. And I think in the group project, they're able to work together. I think one of the best elements of that assignment is that we can have scientists work with artists, work with writers, work with people who can do traditional archival research, work with people who have film and editing skills, and by working together, they're able to see the value of all those different contributions. I employ it in several different ways. So obviously, we use computers as a way of helping us deliver our lectures, although when I've taught graduate students about the use of technology, I always caution them not to let PowerPoint or Keynote, depending on your preference, not to let it become the focus of one's teaching style, that it's really a tool, and that you need to think of technology as providing tools that can enhance different learning styles, but that it doesn't replace the actual interaction with students. So, for example, we use Keynote in order to provide students with background information, in order to present them with photographs, with images, with film clips. But at the same time, we like to use it to also spark discussion. So, for example, we use iClickers in our large class because it's a convenient way of quizzing students on the reading, because I have found that as time has gone on, a lot of students won't do assigned reading unless they're actually held accountable for it in some way. So we have daily quizzes in our large introductory lecture course. But we also found that the iClicker technology is a great way of sparking discussion, because you can do polls, for example. I think the most challenging thing in my teaching has been a change in the level of university support for teaching assistants. So, for example, when I first arrived at UC Santa Cruz, we generally had discussion sections of about 20 people, sometimes 25 people. Because of budgetary cuts, that ratio has now gone from about 20 people per section to, well, right now it's 30 people per section, but what I hear is that next year it may go up to 40 people per section. And to me, you cannot have a meaningful discussion section with 40 people. And that to me is a real disservice to our students, and it's going to necessitate creative redesigning of classes, because I think we're going to have to think of providing alternatives to sections, maybe grouping students into smaller clusters and varying sections from week to week, so that instead of having them every week, they might have them every other week. As faculty, we will have to be responsible for teaching sections as well in order to reduce that workload on our teaching assistants. And I think we're going to really have to set up new expectations for the meaning of a section, just because the increase in ratio, and it's largely a budgetary factor, right, has really changed that dynamic. Well, I think one issue is making sure that their department and that the central administration will give both people credit, right? There's always this issue, well, if you're team teaching, are you just switching off in terms of who gets credit for teaching that course? And I would argue one of the best things we can do is make sure that if you're team teaching, both people get equal credit, so that they don't have to feel like they need to, do an additional course, because that's going to discourage people from taking the time to really try to develop a team-taught course. I think encouraging people to cross departments, we can provide incentives, giving people time off or giving them additional funding so that they have the incentive to take that intellectual and pedagogical risk would be paid back by innovative teaching that would excite students, would, I think, ultimately benefit the individual's research as well as their teaching profile, because as I said, you learn a lot from teaching, from working with your students, from developing different approaches. The main thing we try to do is set up an environment where they're constantly interacting. So even in a large lecture course, we will not just read a lecture, we will ask students to respond. We will pose questions. We will, use the eye clickers to engage students so that throughout the class, they're not just sitting there passively listening. I think we recognize that it's easy to fall into that trap, especially in a really large course where it's easy to hide. So we try a lot of techniques to make it difficult for students to hide, and to make it difficult for students to tune out. And what's amazing is even with over 200 people, students can actively engage in a debate. And all you have to do is set up the question, encourage participation, maybe wait occasionally for pregnant silences, which comes with experience. I think initially, when I first started out, the idea of silence was very frightening and alarming. And so if I threw out a question and no one responded, I would immediately try to fill in. Whereas now I know, maybe you wait for 10 to 20 seconds and then you look for students and you encourage them by letting them know there's no right answer, right? You're not going to be penalized if you're confused or if you're unsure. And if you set up that kind of dynamic, people are more likely to participate. I think the most satisfying thing is when I see students get really excited, or when students come up to me and they thank me for teaching the class, or when I hear back from students. Because even though I'm not on Facebook, I do a ton of email, and when I hear back from students about how they still remember my classes, or I still have relationships with many of the students, I take a lot of pride in keeping in touch with them. I've been at weddings, I haven't been at births, but I've been at christenings, and seeing how the kind of influence you can have on people can really change them. And when they tell you that you've changed their life, I think there's nothing like that. And it doesn't matter, how little money you may make. That kind of intangible reward is really fulfilling.